any of this working? Hello, hello, hello. Hey, folks. Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm not your video, but I'm okay. I guess it's not quite working. Look, let me begin by thanking Reverend Blasingame, who I've known, and for allowing us to be here in this facility. Please have a seat if you have one. If you don't, well, I apologize. Kevin, thank you very much for that introduction. Kevin came earlier in the day, and then Thomas came out. I understand, Kevin. Where are you, Kevin? There you are. Thanks for you did the pre-program. They tell me. Is that right? I don't know who did what now. I'm getting no, but I know who introduced me just now. Because you know why? Because I know he has a mom named Kathy and a dad named Joe. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for the passport into town. I appreciate it very much. I understand that the mayor runs the same way I run in Delaware. I only had one sign, one billboard, one sticker. It just said Joe. Joe. And Joe, I think the reason they voted for me is they confused me with you up in Delaware. But folks, look, the fact is that, there's a lot of similarities between my state and yours, believe it or not. And not only we have the 8th largest black population in the country, we also have a significant military base called Dover Air Force Base. And I used to have to always worry about my good buddy, and he was my great, great friend, your Senator Fritz Holland, stealing all our planes, But the Army base here, the Shaw Air Force Base, and the military, Central Command is. I know you all know it, but the people maybe listening to this when it gets recorded should know. You all are responsible for the ability for us to even operate in the Central Command, meaning in the area of the Persian Gulf and all through Iraq. I've spent many times with your folks, many times. And my son, Bo, was the United States Army. Worked for Central Command in Iraq for a year. And he got to be with a lot of you all. And you all are the best warriors in the history of the world, and that's not hyperbole. You really are. And folks, look, one of the things that I don't think people fully understand is that, and by the way, this is my buddy's birthplace, and the good news is Chili's still here. Where's he sitting there? There you go, man. I tell you what, you even look like your brother. You know what I mean? Now, that can be a liability sometimes, I know. But Jim Clyburn and Chili have been great friends, and I can't tell you how much I appreciated Jim's endorsement and full-throated endorsement. It was a big, big deal. And Mo Brown running for the House seat here. It's a different day. Things are going to change, God willing, and the creek not rising. And folks, look, one of the things that I'd like to start off and make a statement about, not about the town meeting per se, but, folks, I want to talk a moment about the coronavirus. And I just want to say a few things to set the record straight. Barack and I, when we were as president and vice president, we took on the virus that was threatening all of Africa and the rest of the world. And we set up a mechanism that worked. But I want to take a moment to say it's not a time to panic about coronavirus, but coronavirus is a serious public health challenge. And yesterday, Donald Trump and Mike Pence decided to silence our leading national medical experts and said, no, this is really serious stuff. They decided that Trump and Pence decided that the public health experts cannot inform the public on their own of what's going on. That you know, I know those experts. I work with them. They work with several presidents from Ronald Reagan through us. And the fact is that Tony Fauci, who is one of the leaders in the world on this issue, is now, I'm told he cannot speak without permission. And, you know, I just think that the idea that the American people want to hear from him and not Mike Pence seems to me so obvious to me. Ladies and gentlemen, it's bad enough that we have a president who can't tell the truth. We now have a president who won't let other people tell the truth. I really mean it. And folks, Trump thought that his upbeat tweets could somehow stop the coronavirus. Well, I have news for Donald Trump. Like the rest of us, this virus is not impressed by his tweets. And here's the point, and I'm being very deadly earnest about this. We need real action in the White House, not more lies. It's no surprise that the president who thinks that climate change is a hoax also thinks that coronavirus is a conspiracy. We need a president who stands for the truth over fiction and facts and science over fiction. Folks, we can beat this virus. We can keep it from being a pandemic. But it takes a lot of work. In the question and answer period, if you want me to talk about it, I'll tell you what we did and how I think it should be done. But it's got to stop. We've got to put pressure on this administration to let Dr. Fauci and others speak, who are the genuine experts, so we can reassure people on what we need to do and what we have to do and what we can do. Folks, what I'd like to do, with your permission, is speak with you for about 10, 12 minutes and then open to questions, if I can, because there's a lot to discuss and a lot of concern people have with good reason. You know, Congressman Clyburn's endorsement of me meant a great deal. It meant a great deal to me because I respect Jim so very much. And the fulsome endorsement that he gave me meant a lot. He said, America's at an inflection point. He talked about it being an inflection point where we're going to make a decision in the next year, between now and November, as to who's going to lead the United States of America for the next 4 years. God willing, we'll be able to handle 4 years of Donald Trump with the right president, right Democratic president. And our children, hopefully, will look back on their history classes as, when they get out to school or to college, as this being an aberration, just a 4-year aberration. But if Donald Trump is elected for 4 more years, he'll change the very nature of who we are. No, I really mean this. You know, I don't care how old or young you are. This is the single most important election. We always say this, but this is a fact. Not because I'm running. This is the most important election you've ever participated in. What America stands for is at stake right now. And this is a man, when the way he's acted from the time he has been elected President of the United States, has done something that is worse than any president has done. He's deliberately from the White House, from the very beginning, tried to divide this nation based on race, based on religion, based on ethnicity, based on your country of origin, based on where you live. It's all about division, not addition. America's always been about addition. That's what we've been. You know, the fact is that this man has done things that no other president ever done. Sitting president. Folks, think about this. This guy's more George Wallace than he's George Washington. Oh, I mean it. Not a joke. But we have an enormous, enormous opportunity, if we defeat Donald Trump, to move this country forward. And it really is extremely consequential. You know, when those folks, I thought that, I thought I understood a lot about how this country works and about how you can defeat hate and you can defeat prejudice. because I got involved as a kid. My state, as I said, is not unlike yours. We were part of that Brown versus Board of Schools case. We were the Board of Education. We come from, I have the 8th largest black population. 20% of my state is African American. That's how I got involved in politics. But I thought that when I came back from law school, my city was the only city in American history, Wilmington, Delaware, ever occupied by the military since the Civil War, because a significant portion of it had been burned down. We had a very conservative governor who happened to be a Democrat, and he brought in the National Guard and the state police and took over the city for 10 months with drawn bayonets in every corner. As my wife, the teacher, could say, you can, Google it, take a look. But here's the deal. The deal is that I got back from school and I had a job with a very exclusive law firm. But after a little bit, I knew I couldn't keep that job, and I quit and became a public defender. And I used to interview my clients in the south side of town before they would be arraigned, along where the railroad station is, the Amtrak station in Wilmington, Delaware. And here I was, 40 years to the month later, standing in that same exact place, waiting for a black man to come 25 miles from Philadelphia in a train to pick me up and take me down to Washington, D.C. We'd be sworn in as president and vice president. And I called my 3 children up because you look over the east side and they call north, anyway, I won't give you the neighborhoods, but look over the same place that had burned to the ground. And at the time, when I was a young public defender, I thought blacks and whites would never come together again in my state. But they had. So I called my 3 kids up while we were waiting for Brock to pick me up. And they were up, and I said, look, don't tell me things can't change. Look, and I pointed out the city had been leveled, and now what was going on. And I said, I wondered if that day would ever come. And it's come. I'm being picked up. And I talked about it with my deceased son, Bo, who was the Attorney General, my other son who ran the World Food Program USA, and my daughter is a social worker. And we got in the train and we're happy on the 17th, going down to Washington. But I thought you could kill hate, Reverend. But you can't. It only hides. It only hides. Because what happened in Charlottesville in 2017? You saw people coming out of the fields carrying torches, contorted faces, their veins bulging, spewing hate, carrying Nazi flags, accompanied by members of the Ku Klux Klan. David Duke saying, this is why we elected him. And a young woman got killed resisting the hate. And he was asked to comment on it. And what was his comment? His comment was, there are very fine people on both sides. Nobody, no sitting president ever said anything like that. Never. And folks, I wrote an article then for the Atlantic magazine saying we're in a battle for the soul of this country. And we are. We're in the battle for the soul of this country. The decency, honor, respect we should have for one another. And folks, we now have an opportunity. Donald Trump has sort of ripped the Band-Aid off, showed the ugly scars he's created. And we're at a new inflection point. Just as what happened in the early 60s in the civil rights movement, when you had folks in Birmingham and other places thinking they're going to put a wooden stake in the heart of civil rights, it enraged people around the country, and they stood up. They stood up. Bull Connor became something people didn't know really existed in places that didn't have large black populations. And they said enough. Well, I think people are ready to stand up again right now. Right now. And folks, I think we have enormous opportunity. Enormous opportunity. And folks, look, this nation isn't looking for a revolution, as some of my colleagues talk about. They're looking for progress. They're looking for results. They're looking for what we can get done. There's so much we can do. You know, this is about you. This is about your families. This is about your community. It's not about me or anybody else running. It's about the community. And folks, you know, let's take a look. Obamacare. Obamacare has provided health care for millions of people who never had it before. 100 million people. 100 million people who suffer from a pre-existing condition. Their children, whether they have Down syndrome or asthma or anything else, not able to get insurance before. But now what happens? It's available. We put in a provision in the law saying that the federal government would pay for Medicaid for poor folks. But folks like your governor in a number of states, the previous governor said, no. See, what do you have here? You have thousands, almost 200,000 people not having health care available to them. Not having because they can't afford to buy it. They can't afford to even buy into the plan, and it doesn't get covered by Medicaid. So here's what I do. I come along and I say, we're going to do what we wanted to do in the first place, Thomas, when we passed Obamacare. And that was to make sure we add what we call a public option. Medicare if you want it. Medicare if you want it. We significantly reduce the price of drugs. We control the price of drugs. We bring them down. We also make sure no hidden bills you get. Reduce the payments, limit the co-pays. We can do this, and we can afford it. And we can afford it. It costs a lot of money, my plan. It costs $740 billion over 10 years. But it doesn't cost $35 trillion over 10 years. And it makes sure that rural hospitals can stay open, that we have anyway, it goes on. I won't bore you with all the detail. We can do it in question and answer. But here's the deal. I'm against anybody who's trying to rip down Obamacare. I'm against the president and any Democrat who says they're going to rip it out and start over again. Second thing, we can make life a lot safer here. Think what's going on with the gun violence all through America now. When I was a United States Senator, I'm the guy that passed the law that said we eliminated assault weapons. They could not be sold. I'm the guy that put in the law saying you could not have a clip in your gun that held more than 10 rounds. We protect geese better than we protect people. If you're shooting international geese, you get 3 shotgun shells. But why in God's name would anybody need a magazine with 100 rounds in it? There's no rationale for it. None, except mass murder. For example, I was up in Charleston, and I was talking about this issue of guns, and I was doing the town meeting. You may have seen it with CNN. And Reverend Anthony Thompson stood up and asked me one of the most poignant questions I've ever been asked. His wife Myra, was killed at the church, AME, that Mother Emanuel. She was shot dead. I had met with him, and I met with others at the time. And he asked me a question. He said, can you tell me how your faith informs how you deal with these things and what we should do? Well, it was one of the most unusual questions I've been asked in the public. I didn't want to proselytize and talk about my religion, but I was talking about what I believe. I believe we are a brother's keeper. I believe we do have an obligation to protect people. No, I really do. And I believe that the only thing that ever got me through the losses I've had, my wife and daughter being killed in an automobile accident, my 2 boys supposedly not going to make it, my other boy coming home from Iraq as a war hero and dying of glioblastoma, suffering for 15 months. There's a great line from a famous philosopher named Kierkegaard. He said, faith sees best in the dark. But folks, we need more than faith. We need action. We need action. The Second Amendment is an amendment that exists and I support, but here's the deal. No amendment is absolute. If one of you stood up and yelled fire right now, and people were headed to the door and people were hurt, you're guilty. It's not freedom of speech. There's limitations and everything. You can't speak, you can yell fire. Well, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because people get hurt. From the very beginning, we've said, the very beginning of the Second Amendment, not everyone can own a weapon, and not every weapon can be owned. And so, I hear people say in my state, who's very conservative on guns initially, that, the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots. Great line. If you're going to take on the government, if that's what it's about, you need one of those F-15s out here, okay? You need some Hellfire missiles. You need something a heck of a lot more than an assault weapon. So it's bizarre the way arguments we have. Yet, we've even had arguments within the Democratic Party about whether or not it's appropriate. I'm the guy that passed the Brady bill, the background checks bill, that kept the guns out of millions of people's hands who shouldn't own them. And legitimate people could, in fact, buy one. I set up a waiting period that you can't just have the background check. If you don't get it checked in 24 hours, you still can't get it. You got to wait at least 5 days and give them a chance to determine what your record is. Well, my good buddy, there's disagreements. My good buddy from Vermont, he voted against the Brady bill 5 times. But one of the other things that's happening here is a number of folks out there decided that the only industry in the world we're not able to sue if something bad happens is the gun manufacturers. If I stood before you today and said, I got a great idea, folks, when I become president, I'm going to make sure no one can sue a drug company. They put out 9 billion opioid pills. They lied to us about how addictive they are. They advertise them. Would you all think that's a great idea? Biden says you can't sue drug companies. Well, I tell you what, think about this. Think about what's happening now, the chaos. And it's not just mass shootings like in Las Vegas, that shooting that took place out there, killing all those folks, or the mass shooting, what happened in Mother Emanuel. It's about more than that. There's a mass shooting taking place every single day on our streets. Every single day, in black, white neighborhoods across the country. And it has to stop. It has to stop. So folks, look, one of the things I can say to you, if you elect me your president, not only am I going to get the assault weapons ban back and limitation on clips, I want to say to our friends, gun manufacturers, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. Well, I tell you what, I love my children. You love your children. And Thomas said it well about his 2 children. How many of you sent your kids off to school in September, or your grandkids, and watched them go off, and the first thing they had to learn when they got to school was how to duck and cover? Literally how to run down a hallways to avoid being shot. That's moral depravity that we're in that situation. It's wrong. And it's wrong, and it's got to change. Look, there's a lot more things to talk about. Let me just say, mention 2, and maybe we can get into questions and answers here. Delaware has another thing in common with South Carolina. We're not very high above sea level along this way, where we are. Delaware, the whole state average is only 3 feet above sea level. A lot less than that because it's the Delaware River and the Atlantic Ocean and the bay. And folks, climate change is real. And by the way, not only is it real, we're 15% of the problem in the United States. 85% of the problem is the other nations. That's why when I was vice president, I spent time with Xi Jinping of China. And I said he would join an effort to deal with climate change if we could embarrass them into doing it. So we set up the so-called Paris Climate Accord. Almost 200 countries agreeing that we would meet certain standards to deal with this issue. Well, guess what happened? This president said, no, there's no such thing as climate change, and pulled the United States out of that accord, freeing everybody else to do whatever they were going to do before. First thing I'll do as President of the United States is rejoin that accord to help put together. And the second thing, to call in the greatest polluters to the United States within 100 days and say, we got to up the ante. That's the deal. And if we don't up the ante, you're going to pay consequences economically for it because we must take care of it. As I said, I have laid out a plan in detail of how we get to zero emissions by 2045 to 2050 area. But here's the deal. Even if we do it all, it's still going to have everything underwater down here because 85% of the problem exists because of the rest of the world. And we're doing nothing to lead it. In addition, we didn't even get a chance to talk about education, which I'll do, but the one ticket to prosperity, the one ticket to the middle class, no matter what zip code you live in, is access to education. And it should not matter your zip code. That doesn't matter. And that's why I have a plan, if you want to talk about it, to how we're going to make it equal for everybody around the country. And folks, we have a lot of things we can do. It's within our power to get them done. But as my mother were here, she'd say, Joey, hush up, boy, and why don't you take some questions? So why don't I take questions, and then we can go on. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody have a question? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Gene Baton, Sumter County Council. Mr. President, welcome to Sumter, the greatest county in America. Once you are in office, what will be 3 of your top issues that you will tackle?
First of all, I used to be in the county council. I left to run for the Senate because being in the council was too hard. They know where you live, right? You can't walk to the grocery store. Well, what'd you do today, man? Now, do you guys do zoning hearings? If I never see a zoning hearing again in my life, I will die a happy man. You talk about war and peace. We're going to put a building here in your corner. Oh, yeah, you are? Anyway, look, I have, there's 3 things I'll do immediately. Number 1, I'm not kidding, I will rejoin on day 1 the Paris Climate Accord and begin to organize the world to move forward. Number two, I will send to the United States Senate an immigration plan that in fact is honorable and decent, that allows a legitimate pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented people. I'll take every DACA student, meaning a student who was underage when they were brought here to the United States, and protect them and find a pathway for them to citizenship. Number three, I think it's critically important that we make it clear on day 1 that I'm going to have an attorney general. Well, let me put it this way. Betsy DeVos will no longer be the head of the Department of Education. Because I strongly believe we have an opportunity to fundamentally expand education in a way that gives everybody a shot. And the 4th thing I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to push and make sure that the thing that I'm proudest of having written, the Violence Against Women Act, that we continue to try to change the culture. But the honest-to-God truth is the first thing I will have to do as president, whomever the next president is going to have to do, and I hope they have the capacity if it's not me, and that is that I will not jokingly, I mean this sincerely, the day after I am elected, before I'm sworn in, I will be on the phone to all our allies around the world to say we're back. No, I really mean it. I genuinely mean it. That we keep our word. There's a reason why. I learned something in the last 3 weeks, or actually almost 2 months now. Number 1, Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be president. Because, Reverend, he knows I know him and he knows me. And I'm not joking. You think I'm joking. I'm not kidding. And, folks, the second thing I learned is that, Kim Jong-un, who's a thug, the guy who runs North Korea, had his brother killed at the airport, poisoned, had his uncle's brains blown out sitting across the table from him. And I referred to him and taking a different position than the president does, this president, on not sending love letters to him. So I found out, and you can, as you can Google this one too, the official news agency of North Korea said, and I quote, "Joe Biden is a rabid dog and should be beaten to death with a stick." I was very proud of that epitaph. And right after that, Donald Trump sent him another love letter. Third thing that I know is Donald Trump doesn't want me to be the Democratic nominee. By the way, not a joke, think about it. You saw what President Obama did. President Obama has asked the television stations to take down a lie that's an ad is a complete lie, taking his words from his book that he wasn't talking about me that he wrote, and criticizing Joe Biden. It's being run by a PAC that supports Donald Trump. Donald Trump also has gone out of his way to decide that he was risking impeachment by trying to go to a foreign power to get him to say something that wasn't true about me, okay? So, and there's a reason why he doesn't want me to be president, to run. By the way, all kidding aside, and to the South Carolina press, if you ever think of a time when a sitting president has spent so much time, and spent well over $15 million so far, so much time and effort to try to determine who won't be the nominee of another party? No, I'm not joking. I don't think it's ever happened. Well, he has reason to be worried, because if I'm the nominee, I will beat him like a drum. Questions?
Thank you, Vice President Biden, for being here. I'm a Native American from the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. And in the 50s, we were recognized by the government as a tribe, but they withheld full federal recognition. And since then, our tribe has suffered. We haven't had access to scholarships or lots of public funding that other tribes have. And honestly, under the Obama administration, nothing was done to move us closer to that. I want to know what you'll do to promise to Native Americans today, how you'll advance that, and specifically for the Lumbee tribe and our recognition.
Two questions, two comments. One, we have the only group of Americans that we have treated as bad or worse than Native Americans are African Americans. And I learned from a guy named Danny Inouye, the senator from Hawaii. They're not tribes, they're Indian nations, and deserves to be recognized as Indian nations. And what we have done is try to expand the recognition of Indian nations so that they have, for example, when I wrote the Violence Against Women Act, you did not have the ability to have prosecution on Indian nations that were people who, in fact, abused their wives, girlfriends, or whatever. I got that changed in the Affordable Care Act. In the Violence Against Women Act. And we should be constantly increasing the capacity of those on that used to be called reservations in Indian nations, to have the ability to control their own destiny. And what I'd like to do with you, if you have time, can you spend a few minutes talking with me after this is over? Talk about it? Okay, thank you.
Welcome, Mr. President. As you know, my name is Mo Brown. I'm running for U.S. Congress here in the 5th District. So, thank you. I'm a small town country boy. I grew up in Belton, South Carolina, a small little town in the upstate. And Belton, like all small towns in the South, had struggles. Diversity in the struggles outweighed the diversity in opportunities. And that was true for me and my family as well. My mom had me at 16 years of age. She had 4 boys by the age of 20. I lost my father in a car accident, and a little bit later, a few years later, I lost my brother in prison. So adversity in my life was prevalent. But I learned how to persevere through that, much like you have with your sorrows and challenges that you had. And through those, I was able to get a scholarship to the University of South Carolina, play football under Steve Spurrier, and also get a finance and marketing degree from one of the best business schools in America, in the Dollamore School of Business. Go on and work for the Department of Commerce and bring $1 billion of capital investment to our great state and over 5,000 jobs. And my story is great. You know, it's really great, and I'm proud of it. I love my country. I love my state because of it. But I think about so many people where I come from, people in this room, Sumter, South Carolina, who doesn't get those opportunities because they don't have the athletic ability that I had to get a scholarship, to expose themselves to all the opportunities of their potential. And I wonder, what will you do to make sure that my story is not an exception to the rule, but the norm? And what is our duty as Americans to ensure that we're involved in government up and down, from the federal down to the locals, to ensure that investments in our community is happening as they should?
I tell you what, I think you're going to do a great job. But let me say, I was a wide receiver too. But I didn't have guys like Franny Persons at 300 pounds coming after me. When I played, the biggest guy in the whole team was 200. When we won the national championship, back then it was the Dunkel ratings, won the national championship for all schools. The fact of the matter is that biggest guy on the team was All-American, was 240 pounds. I don't know how the hell you made it, kid. By the way, you all know my buddy Franny Persons is with me today. Franny, where are you, Franny? There he is. Franny's my third son. I carry a picture of him on his uniform when he played at South Carolina, and he was 298. And I thought to myself, my Lord, if he didn't like me, I'd be in trouble. And by the way, he was my body guy, worked with me for a long time when I was vice president. You know who my top Secret Service agent was? He played at Clemson, was an All-American. 83. When they met, he's 6'8" too. And when they met each other, it was like, you guys take it seriously, man. All right, I should stop reminiscing here. Let me get right to the point. Look, if you only had $1 to spend on education, where would you spend it? Preschool or post-high school? You got it. Now, I think we can do both, but here's the deal. Although everybody's picking it up now on stage, I'm the guy that introduced the idea and the legislation, not legislation because I'm not in the Congress right now, and to triple the money for Title I schools. Title I schools are schools. It's not based on color. It's based on income. It's based on the amount of money that a school district has to spend based on property taxes to increase the prospects for their kids. And so it's now $15 billion. It was recognized early on that they need a little more help. For example, in all white districts, you spend $26 billion more a year than you do on other schools, okay? And we can equalize that in a big way. And one of the things I do is I propose, and I will get passed, increasing from $15 billion a year to $45 billion a year we spend on Title I schools. And by the way, we can afford it. There's a $1.9 trillion tax cut that shouldn't even been passed. It's affecting. So there's a whole lot of things we can do. And by the way, for the record, you want to go on my website, I list exactly how I pay for every single thing that I propose. But here's the deal. If you do what I just said, you're going to be required, if you take that money in a Title I school, and they're rural and inner city schools that are Title I schools, that you have to raise teachers' salaries. And you have to get them to the point where they can make $60,000 a year, because we are short, right now we're short 115,000 teachers, and by 2025, in the next 5 years, we'll be 250,000 teachers short. Now, who do you think that affects? It affects the school districts that can't afford to pay as much as other districts. And my generation, the baby boomers, are dropping out of teaching, and the new generation is not getting involved. Why? If you graduate at magna cum laude from SC or that other school, what's it called, Clemson, or any school in this state, or any private school in the state, You graduate magna cum laude with a degree in education, you start off getting paid 23% less than anyone else graduating another degree, except the area my daughter picked, social work. They get paid even less. Now, so you increase the salaries, number one, attracting teachers into the district, number one. Number two, every single solitary child that's 3 years old, 4 years old, and 5 years old will be in school, not preschool, not daycare, school. Because every study done by every great university in America in the last 9 years shows that if you come from a background where you in fact have not had the access to the kinds of opportunities you come from in a middle class or upper middle class background, white or black, that you in fact are behind the eight ball. You're behind the eight ball. But if you start a child, 40% of the brain is developed by then, and the rest is developing. You put a child in school in 3, 4, and 5 years old, pre-kindergarten, it increases by over 55, it goes from 50 to 59%, their chances of being able to go all the way through all 12 years of school without getting in trouble, doing academically well, and being able to go on to get a certificate and or a degree beyond that. Now, it's in everybody's interest that happen, number one. Number two, you have in the United States of America now in all schools, you have one school psychologist for every 1,507 people. The estimate is it should be 1 to 500 because you can pick out early the anxieties of young children, and no matter what school they're in, Title I or any other school. We've learned a lot. We learned that mental illness does not cause drug abuse. Drug abuse causes mental illness. I beg your pardon, I got it backwards. Drug abuse does not cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse. Anxiety causes it. And so you can detect this early on if you have students. And we're not talking about moving people into rehab or anything like that, but helping them deal with whatever the problems, psychological problems they're dealing with in their school setting. And you can do a lot. We also increase the number of nurses. And some of you are on school boards. Well, how many times you had to make a decision, do we hire a school nurse, or do we hire another teacher? That shouldn't be the discussion. Secondly, I provide for the ability for every single person who's qualified to go to community colleges for free, including people having to come back and learn a new trade, learn a new capacity. We've lost in this so-called fourth industrial revolution, we've lost, for example, 220,000 people in retail selling products who are high school educated, average age, 50 years of age, or 49 years of age, average salary $50,000. What happens is a high school educated person, all of a sudden you're out of work. Why? Because you all shopped on Amazon. You didn't go to the local outlets. And so the outlets are closing all over the country. And we got to deal with it. They got to re-educate people. And there are 100,000 good-paying jobs out there that people aren't qualified for because they've not been trained for. Like, for example, in a factory for they call them photovoltaic shingles, or you have people don't know how to run a machine that can make a solar panel. Well, it takes 19 weeks to learn that, and the jobs are there. That's just one example. There's a lot of other examples. So, thirdly, I make sure that one of the things that people forget about is HBCUs, historic black universities and minority universities, why did they exist? Because they weren't allowed to go to the state universities because of color or background. And so I invest over 10 years $70 billion in HBCUs. Now, by the way, I'm not doing that because it sounds good and I want to let people of color to know I support it. Here's the deal. They haven't been able to build endowments, and they've not been able to compete for the contracts that are hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars of contracts that the federal government lets out. For example, University of South Carolina, University of Delaware, we have a great metallurgy department, and the United States of America wants to have people determine how do you make a lighter weight metal so you can land in an aircraft carrier and reduce the weight of that carrier. Or what do you do in terms of, anyway, the whole range of things. Well, for example, One of the big things that people are learning, and we did this in our administration down at HBCU in the Tidewater area, and that is the whole issue of what we're going to do about cybersecurity, not just internationally, but also internally in the United States. So they got a great grant. They were able to do this, and now that university is growing. They're going to produce people when they graduate who are able to get the top jobs in the country because they've had the ability to be exposed. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing I think is really important to do is make sure we deal with student debt, because people are graduating, and I can't promise you what some of my colleagues are promising. They're going to spend a total on Medicare for all, plus wiping out all student debt. Plus, they're already up to $60 trillion in 10 years. What I'm saying is two things. One, if you engage in public service, if you teach, if you work at a violence women's shelter, if you're engaged in doing anything that's related to public service, that you are able to write off up to $10,000 a year of your debt while you do that job, up to $50,000. That would wipe out the vast majority of debt, but you've earned your way through it. You earn your way to get out of that debt. Secondly, there's a program now that says that it's very hard to qualify for. I'd make it, you can qualify for it much easier under my proposal, and that if you graduate with a student debt, you're in a position where you now are, if you qualify, you're able to only have to pay back 10% of your disposable income every year to pay the debt off. Well, it's very easy to reduce that to 5% and make sure that it is open to people across the board. And so that when I say disposable income, it means after you pay your rent, your car, and everything else. Now, there's an overwhelming economic reason to do this, and I'll stop. I know I could go on this too long probably, but here's the deal. What are the projections of the leading economists in the nation is that the generation that's graduated and has graduated, the millennials, and who are graduating in debt, that it's going to cause the economy of the United States to slow down. We are a consumer-driven economy. And so if you're dealing with a debt that is significant, look what's happening. You're not able to go out and put a down payment on a house if you're married and buy a house. You're not able to own your automobile. You're not able to invest in business. You have this enormous debt that becomes first. And so there's a practical reason, in addition, to help people earn their way out of that debt. And lastly, I think we have to do is we have to, and this sometimes it gets misinterpreted, so I want to be careful here, but those of you who are professors or teachers know what I'm about to say. And that is, there is a direct correlation between success in schools when in fact you have people who look like you teaching in those schools. And there's overwhelming data to that. For example, if you have an African American population in the school, that can be 10% to 50%, whatever it is. If you have one teacher of color, a male teacher of color, it increases the prospects and the idea that people that they do better, increases performance. It's a little bit like, and this is my last comment, it's a little bit like my administration is going to look like the country. Not a joke. Barack and I did that. It's important. And by the way, it's important just across the board. My cabinet's going to be made up of men and women, of color or not color. It's going to be made up of people across the board. And the vice presidency, and as well as the Supreme Court. I'm very involved as a member. I've presided over more Supreme Court justice hearings than anyone in history that's alive now, for real. Because I worked very hard to make sure Sotomayor got on the court. The first Latino woman. Worked very hard. Elena Kagan. She used to work for me in the Judiciary Committee. I made sure we had, RBG. You know who she is, right? Well, I'm looking forward to appointing the first African-American woman to the United States Senate. Not to satisfy anybody, but to have the court look like America. And there's an incredibly number of well-trained and experienced people in every sector who are able to do these things. And I think it's important we focus on it. I've said too much. I can answer yes or no. Okay, who's got a mic back there? Anybody? Would you go ahead, pick somebody here. Thank you. I don't know enough about what's going on in the specifics, but I know that yeah, I can find out about it. And by the way, I think she is a great mayor, though. She's been a wonderful mayor, and I think she's done a great job. But I will check it out. Yes, sir. She got one there.
This won't take but a minute. I don't think it's any surprise to everybody that we have a very confrontational relationship now between the two parties. I have to say that as much as I loved and respected President Obama and your administration, that I was a little frustrated that Merrick Garland didn't get a chance. And if you don't have a Democratic Senate when you're president, I guess my question is, are you ready to get down and dirty? Because certainly President Trump has proved that sometimes that's effective politically.
Well, it depends what you mean by down and dirty. But I'm going to look, here's the deal. It's not sufficient that Donald Trump be defeated. We have to elect a Democratic Senate. And we can. But are you ready to get down and figure out who's most likely to help a Democratic Senate get elected? Do you think anybody but me can actually help elect a Democratic Senate in North Carolina? Do you think anybody but me can help elect a Democratic senator in Georgia? Do you think anybody? So my point is, I really mean this sincerely. It's important that we win back, and excuse me for walking in front of you, win back the United States Senate. We got to get to 51 votes. And we can. We can. We can do that. And we have to keep the House of Representatives. Now, there's two things you do. If you notice, I got an awful lot done as vice president. Every time there was a problem up on the Hill, I couldn't get everything done, but I got a lot done. And the reason I got a lot done is because even though I have strong disagreements with my Republican friends in many cases, I've learned early on from a guy named Mike Mansfield, who was a senator from Montana, who was the Democratic leader. Remember him saying to me once, Joe, it's always appropriate to challenge another woman's or man's judgment. It's never appropriate to question their motive, because you don't know their motive. You think you know it. But once I say, you're in the pocket of big oil, or you're in the pocket of this, or you've lied about that, or you've done this, and say, by the way, let's work out an infrastructure bill to make sure that we don't have flooding so badly. Fat chance. So I've never questioned another man's motive. That's why I've gotten so much done. I'll give you an example. We put forward a bill that was $900 billion to be spent in 18 months, the Recovery Act. $900 billion. The president used to love doing this, the State of the Union message. He never told me he was going to do it. And he says, and by the way, in order to get this done, we're going to turn to Sheriff Joe will do this. Okay? Well, here's what I had to do. I had to go out and find 3 Republican votes. I got 3 Republicans to change their vote and vote for the Recovery Act because it made a gigantic difference in keeping us from going into depression. And when that happened, I managed that act all the way through for 18 months with less than 0.2% waste or fraud. And whether it was Democrats or Republicans, they'd say, we're going to do this and such with the money. And I said, for example, one Democrat said, we're going to build a Frisbee park with it. I said, no, you can't. And they said, oh, yeah, we can. The law says this. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to come out and hold a press conference and say you're wasting money. Well, all of a sudden, they had an epiphany. They decided not to do it. So my generic point is you've got to be level with people and be straight with them. And one of the things that I was able to do, even at the end of the administration, we were not able to change. Look, when Merrick Garland was named as our nominee, and they wouldn't even hold a hearing, I called 12 Republican senators, and I said, you know, you're ruining the constitutional process here. Every one but one acknowledged that. But you know what they said? It doesn't go to courage, but they said, if I call for a hearing, the Koch brothers will drop anywhere from $6 to $15 million into my campaign, and I'll lose the primary. So I can't do it. I said, that's not what you're supposed to do. They said, but that's the fact, Joe. That's the fact. So dealing with gerrymandering and spending on campaigns, unlimited spending, taking on that issue, we need a constitutional amendment to say the only money that can be spent is public money from the Treasury based on the population of your state, and everybody gets the same amount of money. You will see all of a sudden, again, a great epiphany happening, because the impact on big money will fundamentally change in America. Now, with regard to what you do when you can't change people's minds on the other team, you go out and beat them. And the way you beat them is not telling lies about them or what this president does, just making things up and doing everything negative. You go into the districts. For example, in 2018, we did not have the Senate, or the House. I was invited into 24 states, purple states, to campaign for 66 candidates. I went in and campaigned for them. We campaigned on one issue, Obamacare. Because you know what happened? What happened was, initially, when we passed Obamacare, I thought it was a great thing. And I said to the president, you ought to take a victory lap, explain it. And remember, I got in trouble because I said you ought to have a fireside chat. Biden's talking about fireside chats. Because people I knew didn't know what was happening. And so what happened, we lost the House of Representatives the next race. In 2016, we lost the House of Representatives. 2018, we went out, and I just went into all those districts and campaigned on one thing, health care. And I said, do you realize that Charlie here is running for the United States Congress in this purple district, and Mary here is the one who, in fact, is against Obamacare, wants to take away pre-existing condition right, wants to take away. And all of a sudden, even in here, you found, no, not me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And we won 41 seats back by just going out and telling the truth. And by the way, I got a real clear message and if you take a look who wants who to run, the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate in Kentucky running against Mitch McConnell has endorsed me, wants me in there. So we're going to go in and we're going to beat Mitch McConnell on the merits. But on the merits. And so it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go after people in terms of their motive. You can just take them on direct. You seem very frustrated. Do you have a question? She's looking at me like my wife looks at me sometimes. And by the way, she does a lot of Peloton too anyway.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Vice President. My name is Mary Beth Berry. I am an associate professor of theater and speech at University of South Carolina in Lancaster campus, the regional campus. My husband, Chris, is a veteran. He actually briefed you in July 2009 in Iraq. So, anyways, and my son, my husband brought me here because I'm undecided. So I was undecided, and I'm still undecided, but he's not. My 12-year-old is also not undecided. If he could vote, he would vote for you because he lost his biological father to cancer when he was 6, and he heard you speaking about how you would put money into a cure for cancer, and so you have his vote. I know it doesn't matter, but you do have it. For me, what I'm wondering is, what drives you? I know you talk about what you and Obama did, but what is your fire? Because you see Bernie, You see Elizabeth Warren, you see that fire. That's what I'm looking for. What is your fire?
Decency and honor and restoring this country's. What got me, no, I really mean it. It's an important question. The fact that I'm not screaming like Bernie and waving my arms, or like Elizabeth, it's not a lack of fire. Here's what look, when people decide, when I got elected at 29 years old before I was eligible to be sworn in, and I come from a very modest background, like many people here do, 3-bedroom house, 4 kids, a grandpop living with us, and my dad having to lose a job and move, etc. So I get it. I've been involved. The fire that has always ignited my interest in every issue I care about is everyone is entitled to be treated with decency. You say you teach speech. I used to stutter very badly. And I'm used to being made fun of by bullies like this president of ours. Okay? But let me tell you something. Every single solitary kid who's out there stuttering should know that does not define who they are.
That's right.
That does not define who they are. Every single kid out there, like your son, whatever loss occurred, we're entitled. My dad used to say, everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity. Not a joke, not a joke. And everyone deserves a shot. My passion is making sure, the reason I got involved was because I come from a background where I know if we're honest with people, if we give them an even shot, there's not a single thing. Look, Wall Street didn't build this country. Middle-class folks built this country, and you're not going to like my sense. Unions built the middle class, okay? Let's get that part straight, number one. And the other thing is that I really resent the notion, because maybe I was on the other end of it, I got to admit it may be a little personal, is that the judgments are made based on where we're from, how we look, what we say, that in fact that determines who we're going to be. I come from a neighborhood up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where the people who were who were subject to prejudice were Irish Catholics, because they were the ones who were in the mines. They were the ones who came first. And I guess I walked away with a bit of a chip on my shoulder with that. So I resent anyone being treated less than anyone else. I mean it sincerely. And look at what I've done. The thing that my dad used to say, the greatest sin is the abuse of power. And the greatest sin, the cardinal sin, is for a man to raise his hand to a woman or a child. I spent 7 years making sure I took on both the women's movement didn't support me initially, and everyone else to pass the Violence Against Women Act. I'm determined to change the culture. No man has a right under any circumstance, unless there's an affirmative commitment to say, yes, you can touch me and do whatever that you want to do with me. If you can't affirmatively say it, it doesn't exist. You have no right. What angers me is people who use their power, the abuse of power in any form. Look, I'll tell you a story. This is maybe the best way to do it in the shortest amount of time. My dad, when he lost, there was no work in Scranton, and he moved away for a year and a half till he could get us. We sent us home with our grandpop in Scranton. My dad finally got a really good job, for us, a good job. He ended up being managing an automobile dealership. He got hired. He didn't own it, just managing it. And even I knew that that's what allowed us to buy the first house. And I remember there used to always be a Christmas party that they'd have at this dealership. And the guy who owned the dealership wasn't particularly, was somewhat crude. Remember in those days that back in the 50s and 60s, you don't remember, you weren't old enough, but where if you opened a bank account, you got a toaster or something, there was always some incentive to do something. Well, if you bought this particular vehicle, you got a bucket full of silver dollars. And this guy was big so-and-so. I'm not going to name him because his sons are good people, his grandsons. And so a Christmas party. And that was the time my mom and dad would go to this Christmas party. They'd get dressed up and go, and I was the oldest of 4 kids. And so they leave early to go to the Christmas party. They clear out the showroom and set up tables and have a dinner for everybody. The owners and the management sit at the table, and everyone from the mechanics to the salespersons, the secretaries, bring their families, and they cleared out the cars in the showroom. And then afterwards, there's a dance. They have a band come and play. And I didn't expect my mom and dad to be home till 11 o'clock or so, and I was the oldest. I was the babysitter. And so about 8:30, my dad comes storming in the door, opens up the dining room door, which led into the back door, led into the living room, and then up 4 stairs, and a split of home in his bedroom. We're all lying on the floor watching TV. He walks right by, and I knew something was wrong. He didn't say anything. And my mother walked in, and I said, "What's the matter, Mom? What happened?" She said, "I'm so proud of your father." I said, "What happened?" He said, "He quit." Because this particular guy did something my father thought was demeaning. In the middle of the dance, he stood up and took a bucket full of silver dollars and threw it out on the floor to watch people pick it up. That's what motivates me, the abuse of power. And this president abuses power. And the second thing is, integrity matters. And what it matters is authenticity. Say what you're going to do. Be honest with the American people. Don't tell people you have a $34 trillion plan and you can pay for it and you're not going to have to pay anything for it. Don't tell people you're for something and be against it. Level with people and tell them how they're going to do it. And I'm glad you asked me the question because it's making me mad even answering it. But thank you. And by the way, her husband, stand up, soldier. One of the things, taking abuse of power, and this is the last thing I'll say to y'all, abuse of power. One of the great honors I had was the president, after we got elected, turned to me and said, "Shut down that war, bring home our combat troops," and began to move in Iraq. I went to Afwa Palace. There's these ugly, these gaudy palaces that Saddam Hussein had built. And I had the ultimate sort of U.S. revenge on Saddam Hussein. This warrior helped me set up for me, and my wife came with me. One of the few first or second ladies ever to go into a combat zone, okay? We had, how many were there? Like 240 United States military officers fighting in Iraq, some with silver stars, purple hearts, bronze stars, across the board. None of them were citizens. None were citizens. I got to stand there and swear in every single one of those, and I thought it was the greatest thing I've ever seen. And by the way, like my son who was there for Iraq, thank you. Thank you for your service. And it matters. And look what he's wearing on top of that hat. We owe you. Now, I'm not being solicitous. We owe you big. We owe you big. Folks, there's only 1% of the population that protects 99% of them. The 99% of us owe them. That's why we got to spend more money making sure that the VA is funded, that you're able to answer the phone. That's why we have to make sure that you have access to education. It really matters. It matters. But look, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. No, they really do. We got to let them know who we are. We choose hope over fear. We choose unity over division. Not a joke. We choose empathy over anger. And guess what? We choose science over fiction. And most importantly, we choose truth over lies. Go get it.
Hush not, child.